Okay. Well, we'll get rolling. Thanks everybody for coming. Just as some quick introductions. So I'm Nick Passalacqua. I'm the current editor of the journal Forensic Anthropology, which is published by University of Florida Press. We've been, talking more and more about trying to do some other types of outreach events, kind of in support of the journal and in support of forensic and anthropology broadly. And there's a lot of surveys going out in forensic anthropology these days. And I thought, with all this survey work, kind of increasing survey work in forensic anthropology, me and the other editors thought it might be a good opportunity to kind of have someone that's like a real expert in kind of putting surveys together, talk to us about, how surveys work and things we might want to keep in mind with that type of stuff. So luckily for us, I work now with Dr. Mark Moritz, professor of anthropology here at The Ohio State University, who's kind of a survey master around here. He teaches, you teach like is it survey methods or research methods? What's the class?
Ethnographic methods.
Ethnographic methods, yes. So lots of survey stuff. So thankfully, he'll share his expertise with us today. A little housekeeping here, just so everybody's on the same page. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the YouTube channel for University of Florida Press. And once it's available, everyone that's registered should receive a link to the recording, and closed caption should be enabled. Um, and if you need closed captioning, you should just be able to click on the closed captioning, icon on the bottom of Zoom. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Moritz, and we can go from there.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about survey design. I think I have to correct Nick that I'm not an expert. I'm just an anthropologist down the hall that I use a lot of surveys and I teach surveys in my ethnographic methods class, but I don't think I would call myself an expert. In this workshop, I will draw from a course that I teach on ethnographic methods. And I designed this course, and actually I thought this will be easy doing a workshop on survey design. I teach that in my ethnographic methods class, but my slides were outdated and I basically had to start from scratch. Fortunately, I had help from a lovely assistant, a sycophant assistant, and I'll show you, I've integrated that into the workshop. The Let's see. Here's an overview of the webinar. I'll start with an introduction of myself and the workshop, and I'll tell a tale of three logics that sketch the bigger overview of survey design. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about surveys, a particular form of interview, its advantages and disadvantages. Then I'll take you through survey design, question format, question order, question placement. Then I talk about the Dillman method, which is a way to increase response rates and to increase the quality of your data. And at the end, we have a Q&A. I've also integrated some surveys in this webinar or workshop. And so I want to start with a poll to get a sense of where you are. So please take a minute or a few seconds actually to describe your survey design skills. So I have a sense of who's in the room or in the Zoom room.
Mark, in case you don't see it, hosts and panelists cannot vote, so I'm not going to be throwing your data off.
Okay, I realize I cannot vote either. And I think Jenna will let me know when the poll, when the survey is done. It's an example question of there's no true or true false answers. It's just a sense of where we are. Jen, have you been able to compile the results?
It's about 80% of the people have answered. Do you want to hear the results now or you want to wait?
I think 80% is a very good response rate for surveys, so let's go.
Okay, so 9 people or 20% said terrible, 13 people or 28% said poor, 17 people or 37% said average, 6 people or 13% said good, and 1 person or 2% said excellent.
I think those two people should be giving the workshop. So that's a good spread. There's plenty of people that are from who this workshop may be useful. Let me introduce myself and give you a heads up. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a non-native speaker of English. I've been here in the country or in the US for about 30 years. But my daughters and wife still make fun of me the way I speak. So if things are not clear, put a question in for clarification in the chat. I use a lot of methods and I mix a lot of methods. Here we got the results. So including participant observation, semi-structured interviews, qualitative data analysis, quantitative data analysis, spatial analysis, agent-based modeling, qualitative comparative analysis, case comparison, network analysis, and surveys. And here you see me actually with my colleague Mwazemu Amadou. He's a visual anthropologist at the University of Maroa in Cameroon. We're he's taking video of cattle behavior, and I'm taking field notes of cattle behavior. And the reason we did that is we tracked cattle in the Logone floodplain. And in the previous year, I tracked them with a GPS tracker. And when I had the results, I could not make sense of them. And so I realized I had to incorporate observations and video to make sense of the spatial data. Let me see. As I mentioned, in this workshop, I will draw on a course that I teach here at The Ohio State University. It's a seminar or workshop for grad students. I teach grad students from social work, cognitive systems engineering, nursing, linguistics, as well as anthropology. And we do a collaborative project in this course. And we start very broad, say the broad part of the funnel with observations. We write field notes. Then we do semi-structured interviews. We analyze all the data, and then we develop a questionnaire or a survey. That shows a picture of the room where where we do the collaborative work on in the course. And here you see a very cute robot that crisscross the Ohio State campus that deliver food. Probably have a robot like that at your university as well. So one of the projects that I did a couple of years ago was on human-robot interactions on campus. And I'll use examples from the survey that we use in that class to illustrate some of the points that I want to make about survey design. There are 3 logics that I use in this course on ethnographic methods. The first one is the logic of conceptual frameworks. And here I draw on the work of Ravitch and Riggin from their book Reason and Rigor, How Conceptual Frameworks Guide Research. And they argue that the conceptual framework is an argument for why the topic one wishes to study matters and why the means proposed to study it are appropriate and rigorous. And this is really important in terms of survey research, because lots of surveys are the most commonly used, one of the most commonly used methods in social sciences, but it's not necessarily the best method. And so the survey may not be appropriate for your particular topic. And actually, it may be better to do semi-structured interviews over Zoom rather than sending surveys out. So you always have to make a logical argument for why and what is the best method for studying your topic. The other logic that I use in the class and throughout the class, and it's also relevant for designing surveys, is about ethnographic logic. And here I draw on the work of Mike Agar. And he argued that ethnography is about translating point of view one into point of view two, using an iterative, recursive, and abductive logic while considering the context and meaning. So what that means is that we all see the world in different ways. We all have different points of view because we grow up in different cultures, in different families. We're in different disciplines, in different cities, in different parts of the country. We speak different languages. And so we all have different points of view. So what ethnography is about is translating those point of views from the people we study into the people we write for. And we do that by using an iterative, recursive, and abductive logic. And so iterative meaning multiple rounds of data collection and data analysis. Recursive means going back between data collection and data analysis. And abductive means that you incorporate ideas and concepts from the people you study in the theoretical models that you develop. So why is this important for survey design? The surveys that you send out, even if you send them out to your colleagues in forensic science, they have different points of view. And so you have to make sure that you get the questions right, that you get the wording of the questions right, that you get the concepts of the questions right, and the point of view of the people that you study. Otherwise, there's a mismatch. The third logic is the logic of research design. And here I draw on the work of Jeffrey Johnson and Daniel Rushka. And they have a chapter in the Handbook of Methods in Cultural Anthropology on research design and research strategies. They argue that research design is about logically connecting the research question to the data and then to the methods for creating and analyzing data to answer the research question. And the key here is that rather than going straight to the method, so you have a research question and then you go, I'm going to use a survey or a semi-structured interview. First, you have to figure out what is the data that you need to answer your research question or test your hypotheses. And then you figure out what is the best way to collect that data. And again, in terms of survey design, you really have to be careful about what data you collect. You should not collect data that is not necessary to answer your research question or evaluate your hypotheses. And it all comes together at the question level. So here's an example of a survey that we used in my ethnographic methods class. And it asks, what is your grade level? The options are freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and graduate students. So here's the ethnographic logic matters here because those terms may not be meaningful for the students that we're administering the survey to. So for example, what about transfer students who first went to a community college and then came to Ohio State? Are they sophomore or freshman? So for them, these wording of the answers doesn't make any sense. And then the other question, in terms of research design, the question is, does this question work? We really were interested in how long people had been on campus and thus how long they were exposed to the robots delivering food. So whether somebody's a junior or senior doesn't necessarily tell you how long they were on campus. And so this is an example of a bad survey question because it didn't generate the data that we needed. As I mentioned, in the class we use a funnel, and I basically use a two-step process. First, I use a broad approach where we use participant observation, we do semi-structured interview, and then we have a sense of what's going on campus or how people relate to robots. And then we use the survey to measure how much people like robots, or how much they hate them, how often they use the robots. So surveys are great for measurement. And so the first, I use an exploratory phase to develop the survey, and then I use a systematic phase to collect the data. In other fields, they start with the survey, they get data, and then they use semi-structured interviews to make sense of the data, much like what I did with my cattle tracking. And for me, that's very inefficient. As an ethnographer, first want to get the words right, and then I'm going to check. And then if I got the words right and I know what I want to, what data I want to collect, then I turn it into a survey. So here's an example from that same study. It asked um, respondents to check all the following that apply. The question is, while on campus, I've seen a food delivery robot bump into me or somebody else, cause a traffic jam, cross the street when they weren't supposed to. You see those answers are in quotation marks. These are actually quotes that we got from semi-structured interview that students mentioned to us. And so when students read these survey answers, it makes sense to them. I have a chat question for you that I would like to some answers to. As you answer that chat question, I will talk a little bit about survey as a particular kind of different survey types. There's many different ways that you can do surveys. The two different ways are questionnaire or interviews. And questionnaires are self-administered, so there's no interviewer present. You can do it by mail or you can do it over the internet. And an interview is conducted by the interview, so it can be face-to-face, over the phone, or over Zoom. So examples of survey formats are face-to-face interviews, so where you can use a survey and go as an interviewer goes through these different questions, question by question. Can be a self-administered questionnaire. Sometimes in the past you got surveys through the mail. It can be telephone interviews in which an interviewer reads the questions over the phone, and then internet questionnaires are the most common, and that's what I will be focusing on. It's also one of the easiest and cheapest ways to do surveys. There's also disadvantages to surveys over the internet. For example, in interviews, there's an interviewer that can explain questions, that can encourage the interviewer the interviewee to expand on answers. But it's also more expensive and it's much more time consuming to do interviews, interviewers with an interview. Take a break here to look at the chat. So I asked, in a few words, what makes a bad question? Maybe Nick, you want to read some of the answers?
Sure thing. Okay, so poorly worded questions is a response. Another response is a survey question does not contain an additional option for participants to say they don't understand the question or they don't like any of the preset answers. Further, surveys that do not contain a free response at the end to catch any misunderstandings are not good. Another is too long so people don't complete it. Another, lack of clarity / ambiguity of questions. Someone else said poorly written questions, unclear instructions. Another one said lengthy surveys, and someone else said questions are too broad. That's what we got right now.
Okay, and those are all legitimate complaints, especially questions that are too long. Private questions, too broad. Those are all problems with questions or problems with surveys. And I'll address some of the ways to make better surveys. So the whole workshop is about avoiding bad surveys. Bad surveys are painful. When I get a bad question and a bad survey, I stop right away. Often I also write the researcher an email saying, here's ways that you can improve your survey. But I also use a lot of surveys myself, both in my work and in my research. And because I send surveys to other people, I also feel obliged to participate in the surveys that others send to me. So it's a social obligation for me. I have to treat others as I want to be treated myself. But it also means that I want to make sure that my surveys are right. I don't want to impose on people with bad questions, long questions, unclear questions, too personal questions, too intimidating questions. So let's move. So now I've sketched the bigger picture, how I use the logic of ethnographic research, the logic of research design, and the logic of conceptual frameworks to talk about. Now I'm going to talk about surveys. I'm going to discuss the question and answer format. I'm going to talk about the question content, the wording of the questions, and the placement of the questions, as well as the order of the questions. There's lots of ways that you can format your questions and your responses. You can have yes/no questions. You can have nominal response format questions asking about race, ethnicity, or occupational class. You can have rank order questions, for example, about your favorite ice cream, interval questions or Likert scale questions, semantic differential responses, where it's a Likert kind of answer with two different meanings on their side, interesting versus boring, simple versus complex. And one of the things you should do when you design surveys is to mix it up. And so if it's only Likert questions or interval response questions, it often quickly kind of gets boring. So some variation in your surveys is one way to keep it interesting for survey takers. For example, you can have sliders, you can have sorters. You also can have unstructured or open-ended questions, but of course, never start a survey with an open-ended question. And in preparation for this workshop, I went to my go-to survey tool, and that's Qualtrics. I saw that there's a new answer and question format. And so here's a way that you can sort items in categories. So I made the categories of fruit, category of leafy vegetables, the category of other vegetables, and then here I had a list of items. And respondents can drag these items to these different categories, and then they can also order them. So for example, what's a more iconic fruit? Probably not tomato, probably apple is a more iconic fruit. And so whatever app you use, I would encourage you to be creative and you vary it, what kind of questions you ask and what answer categories you use. And I realize I go very quick, but I have some resources that may be useful, and I'm also willing to share this PowerPoint with you. So the question content is really important. So the first one, is the question really necessary? And again, you only want to collect the data that you need to answer your research question. You do not want to collect data and ask questions just because it's interesting or just because everybody is asking demographic questions. Maybe your demographic questions are not necessary for your project. So use the logic of research design to figure out what data is needed and what data is not needed. You have to avoid double-barreled questions. You have to make sure that the respondents actually can have the needed information. You need the question wording right, not too specific, and or maybe more specific or more general. You have to avoid questions that are biased or loaded. And if you have questions that are too personal or too intimidating, or they're about topics that are too sensitive, then you have to worry whether respondents will answer truthfully. And I mentioned at the beginning of this workshop that I had help from a lovely assistant. Of course, that lovely assistant is ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT to give in a couple of examples or examples for each of those problems. And I won't go through all these examples, but when you go to that when you use that QR code, and I'll ask Jenna to put the URL in, wait, I'll do it myself. put the URL to the handout.
I can do it, Mark.
Okay,
Oh, you got it.
I got it. So in the URL is a whole set of examples. So here's one example for avoiding a double-barreled question. So the question is, how satisfied are you with labs equipment and safety procedures? Problem is, there are two questions. One question is about the labs equipment, and one question is about safety procedures. And so this should be split in two different questions. How satisfied are you with the condition of your lab equipment? And how satisfied are you with your lab safety procedures? And there's more examples for all of those. The wording of the question matters as well. So the question is to be clear, can it be misunderstood? You have to figure out what are the assumptions that the question make. You have to make sure that the time frame is specified. You cannot make the question of the wording too personal or too direct, and again, not loaded or leading. And so the clarity really matters. And what you think is clear is not necessarily clear to the people that are responding to your questions or that taking your survey. So to give one example of a loaded question, again, this is just one of an example, and you can find it in the same PDF that I posted to the internet. Do you agree that the current accreditation standards are too restrictive for small labs? And the way the question is phrased is problematic in multiple ways. And it's asked if it's too restrictive, that's a leading question. And also the fact that it starts with, do you agree, is also a way that leads, that makes the question leading. So we better to ask, how would you describe the impact of current accreditation standards on smaller forensic labs? So more neutral wording, that respondents are not forced to answer as you want them to answer. Just as the wording of the questions matters, the placement of the questions is also really important. So if I have a survey about forensic anthropology, and for example, say something crazy, I start with a question about the current political conditions in the United States. The following questions, the respondents will answer with that current political condition in their mind. And so I prime them, or I frame them by asking the questions in order. So if you have a hypothesis that you want to keep secret or that you want to not disclose, you have to keep that later in, put that later in your survey. So keep the order of the questions really matters. If your question is buried, if the questions are not organized by topic, that also leads to problems. And I'll give you an example of that. So here's an example of a question that doesn't receive sufficient attention because of surrounding questions. Again, this can be found on the worksheet. And so this is a problematic sequence. So there's 4 questions. How long have you been practicing forensic anthropology? How many cases have you handled in the past year? How often do you experience vicarious trauma related to your work? What methods do you use to estimate age of death? So the third question is an entirely different question. It's not a technical question or a practical question. It's about an emotional and cognitive aspect of the work of forensic anthropologists. So that should be in an entirely different category or an entirely different block. Moreover, you go from questions that are about technical issues or neutral issues, and you shift to questions about an entirely different topic, emotional topics, then you should give the respondents some heads up and say, now I've asked a few questions about the technical aspects of your job. Now I want to ask a couple of questions about the emotional aspects of your work. So these transitions are really important. Of course, you have to make these transitions as short as possible because most people don't read them. Order of the questions also matters. I mentioned earlier that never start a survey with an open-ended question. If I get a survey like that, I stop right away because it's too much work. You have to start with easy questions. And as you start with easy questions, people become invested in the survey. Later, you can ask these more open-ended questions or more difficult questions or more threatening questions. By then, people are already invested in the survey. And unless you really make a bad survey, they will finish the survey. If you ask about historical demographics, follow a chronological order. So go from kindergarten to primary school to middle school, high school, university. Don't mix it up. Ask about one topic at a time and put it in different blocks. Use transitions between topics and spice it up and use different question and answer formats to avoid repetition. I'll give you an example of how not to start with easy questions. This would be a terrible first question. How would you rate the reliability of osteometric methods in your casework? So it's complex, technical, evaluative, and it might intimidate respondents early on. A better question is really simple. In which type of institution do you currently work? University, medical examiner's office, law enforcement. And again, the students get informed. Respondents get invested in the survey and are more likely to complete the survey. Again, there's another chat question. So I showed a number of these things that you should do and should not do. And I'm interested to know if you had made surveys in the past, what kind of mistakes did you make in the surveys that you designed? You can put the answers in the chat. And I make errors all the time, so I'm pretty sure you make errors. You make errors too. So see, Andrea mentioned creating a question and unintentionally pigeonholed respondents into certain responses. It's kind of a leading question. Or not enough options. So certain options were not included. And again, having an exploratory phase where you figure out what are all the options is a great way to make sure to increase the quality of your surveys. So I realize I went quickly through all these issues. Again, I will share the PowerPoint, and I encourage you to look at the PDF with the ChatGPT recommendations or examples of good and bad questions. What I want to talk now about is the Dillman method. It used to be called the Dillman method. Now it's called the tailored design method. This was developed by Don Dillman. He's now at Washington State University, and he's part of a group that does lots of survey work. This is one of the books that describes the method, and this method has helped to increase response rates and to improve data quality. And I will cover some of these things, and these are strategies that you can use to in your survey. So one is personalization and trust, emphasizing the benefit of participation, minimize the cost of participation, recruitment process, using multiple contacts, accessible design, and data security and privacy. And the QR code takes you to the website of the Don Dillman and his team. and there's a poll going on. I think there should be a poll going on. And that is the link to the website of Don Dillman and his team. So the poll is, what is the average response rate for online surveys? And the first poll, we stopped at 80% because I thought it was pretty good. Curious to see what you think is the average response rate for surveys.
While we're waiting on those responses, Mark, there's just there were a couple more responses came into your last statement about what makes a bad survey.
Okay.
So Kathleen said, in a survey I have taken, the researcher asked for summary information at the end based on technical scores from earlier in the survey, but I had not written down those scores and I wasn't asked to write them down and there was no back button. So I couldn't complete the survey because I didn't have the information it needed for the final questions. And then Matt says, not including definitions/criteria for list options.
Ambiguous wording is a big problem. Again, I cannot tell this enough. And so in our mind, everything is clear. But for our respondents, that's not necessarily the case. So I see the results. So 38% said 0 to 25% response rate for online surveys. The majority, 47%, said 26 to 50%, and 30% said 51 to 75%. And the right answer is actually something about between 0 and 25. And often it's only 10% response rate. So response rates are really low in internet surveys. And that is why designing good surveys is really, really important because it increases your response rate. I'm an anthropologist by training, so I have to include an anthropologist or a sociologist in this case. The total Dillman method is based on the idea that surveys are a social exchange. It's just in many ways it is about at the heart of the tailored design method is a social exchange. And people respond to surveys when they trust the requester, when they see value in helping with completing the survey, and they feel that the task is not overly burdensome. And so the idea of the survey is to create a positive respondent experience. It's not so much about the technology as it is about human-centered communication. So in the previous examples, I've really focused on the questions. And the questions are important, and the ordering of the questions is important. But really, it's a social relationship that you create with your survey respondents. And the total Dillman method explains ways that you can do that. And I'll discuss those now. First is personalization and trust. So when you send emails to people to ask them to participate in the survey, they have to be credible and personal. I use institutional branding, as you see on this screenshot of a survey. As you see this PowerPoint, I'm from the Ohio State University. You can trust me, I know what I'm doing. If an email needs your name as well as a clear purpose. So you should clearly and briefly explain what the survey is about. Do not use no reply addresses, provide contact information and assurances about confidentiality. And here, this was for a class project. I think we did a fairly good job. So we explain it's for the course. So we ask students to help other students. We explain it. It's very short, only 3 minutes. We emphasize the helping part and we really thank them. We very much appreciate if you'd help us. We also say there's no obligation to participate. You can stop at any time. We won't record any information. If you have any questions, you can contact a real person, and here's his phone number. So this is one of the ways that you can establish personalization and trust. The other thing is reduce the burden, making it as short as possible. I used screenshots from Qualtrics, from surveys that we used in classes. And the key thing here is that most people now take surveys on their phones or maybe on their iPads or tablets. And so you have to make sure that it looks good and it works well on on phones or mobile phones. So mobile-friendly questions, minimize open-ended responses, make navigation intuitive. And I think one of the people in the chat said, could not go back. Look, I got here a progress bar that shows how far you go, how far you are into the survey. I have a back button and a next page button, and I start with a relatively simple question. And again, you have to ensure it's compatible across all devices. The other way is recruitment to increase participation. And I get lots of surveys from The Ohio State University, from the administration. You want to know about all kinds of things. And often what they do first is they send a message saying, in a couple of days, you will receive an email invitation to participate in a survey. So they could explain what's upcoming. Then a couple of days later, I get the invitation email. There's a link and it has clear instructions. And then a couple of days later, if I don't complete it, I'll get a thank you or a reminder. And then there's two more reminders. And so in this example, there's the surveyors are really persistent. They use free reminders. And I do that too if I survey grad students in our department or my colleagues in the department, because I know them, and so I can pester them a little bit. But if I were to do a survey of people I do not know, then I probably leave it only to 2 reminders to encourage people to participate in the survey. Then design and usability, keep it simple, keep it consistent, keep it professional. I think that's one of the reasons why I like Qualtrics rather than Google Forms or Microsoft Forms or SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey, the name itself, it just doesn't scream serious and professional. I avoid long scrolling pages. As I mentioned, I have next and back buttons, and I always pre-test my survey. I really focus on what does it look like on a mobile phone, not what does it look like on a computer. Then the other thing is ethics and data security. And this is really important. So most of the surveys that I do, our data is confidential. I aim to protect the privacy of the people that are participant. So I make Qualtrics does a lot of that, make sure it's a secure link, is good with data protection. The other thing I do is do not record the respondent's IP addresses, location data, and contact info. Again, this is a screenshot from Qualtrics where this is one of the settings. Just to give you an example, what happens if you do not do this. In one of the research projects that we did in my class, one of the students had just taken a course in GIS, Geographical Information Systems, or spatial analysis. At that time, I had not turned this on. I didn't know that this existed. And in the survey results, we had the IP address, and the student was able to find the location of the people who take the survey based on the IP address, and they made a nice map, even though I said clearly that this should be, we should protect the privacy and confidentiality of our respondents. So since then, I always turn this on, so I don't record IP addresses. I mentioned Qualtrics multiple times. I also mentioned Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, and Microsoft Office or Microsoft Forms. OSU, or The Ohio State University, has a subscription to Qualtrics. So I don't pay anything. I can make as many surveys as I want. Google Forms is also free. Microsoft Forms, if your university uses Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Office, you are most likely able to use that as well. And SurveyMonkey, you have to pay for, and so you get 25 interviews or respondents for free, but after that you have to pay. And of course, there's many other platforms as well. And they all more or less do the same thing. So whatever is the cheapest for you, has good data protection, looks trustworthy, use. I think there's one more chat question. We're nearing the end of the workshop. Chat question is, what's one thing you will do differently designing your next survey? And I realize I run through all these PowerPoint slides, but I'm interested to learn what you picked up thus far. As you think about that, I'll finish my slides. Again, I have a screenshot from Qualtrics before I publish. When my survey is ready, I click publish. And one of the things that Qualtrics does, I think the other apps do that as well, is they check for accessibility. So is this survey accessible for people with disabilities? And Qualtrics gives examples for how to improve the accessibility of your surveys. Strongly encourage you to follow up those recommendations and make your survey as accessible as possible for everyone. I've referenced already, mentioned a couple of times, pre-testing your surveys. In my mind, everything is always clear. Then when I administer surveys to students or my colleagues, I'm always embarrassed by all the mistakes that I make and things that are unclear. So the only way to find out whether your survey is actually clear is by having other people test it. You can ask people to take the survey while you're sitting next to them, and they talk about how they answer the questions, how they think through the questions. Or you can have a focus group where a number of people take your survey and then discuss how it can be made better. Again, test it before you send it out, and test it with multiple people from different perspectives. And finally, it's a social exchange, and in that social exchange, you have to thank people multiple times for participating in your survey. You have to thank them at the beginning for taking the survey. You have to thank them in the end. And you can also, if it's not anonymous survey, you have their contact information, you can also send them an email to thank them for their participation. And one of the options you can do, again, to strengthen that relationship between your survey respondents and you, is to share, for example, the results from the survey or a short report. I think I'll leave it at that.
Mark, would you like me to go through the responses here to the
Yes, please.
one thing you will do differently? So we got a bunch of stuff here. It's good. Okay, so Kathleen said, structure the questions so the easy/low burden questions are at the beginning and save the hard/intensive free responses to the end. Someone else said, add pre-notice message. Matt said, check out Qualtrics and other tools. Sharon said, keep it clear, brief, and straight to the point. Matt said, stop using SurveyMonkey. Joshua says, aim for concise questions worded appropriately to avoid bias. Kristen says grouping emotional emotional versus technical questions. I can't read this full name here. Said searching for anonymization option in the questionnaire software. I didn't know about this before. I didn't know about that before either, actually, and I've used Qualtrics a number of times. I was shocked to see that. It's cool. Amelia says, do some ethnographic research before creating the survey. That's what we got.
Cool. And I think one of the things that I didn't, so I mentioned I had a lovely assistant and I used ChatGPT. And I found it really helpful. Of course, ChatGPT and generative AI make all kinds of mistakes. I was able to assess whether the work of ChatGPT was good. But I would not necessarily discourage you from using AI to help you refine your questions. And again, you still have to pre-test your questions, pilot your questions with real people. And of course, you have to check whether, in terms of the logical research design and conceptual frameworks, but I would not discourage you from using AI to improve your surveys.
So we're getting some thank yous in the chat. If anybody has, questions for Dr. Moritz, please feel free to put them in the chat and I can manage them for us. We do have at least one question so far. I don't know if you saw this earlier, Mark, but you've kind of mentioned it or danced around it a little bit a few times. But so somebody earlier asked, can we incorporate or use AI to shape better survey questions? That relates to what? So that's a question, right? Can we use AI to shape questions, which you kind of just talked about? And they also ask, what is the role of AI in shaping the future of ethnographic research? Would be happy to know your perspective.
Oh, that's too big a question, but it's super interesting. So just shared an article with one of the students in our program. It's from the New York Times, and the reporter wanted to go 48 hours without AI. And one of the things that I learned is that AI is everywhere, not just generative AI, but machine learning. And I find it super interesting. So that's also why I study the robots. Of course, the robots on campus also use AI. And so every day I see the robots interacting with the humans. And so, yeah, that's super interesting. Now I forgot what the first question was.
It was just, can we or how can we incorporate AI to create better surveys and better survey questions?
Yeah, you have to experiment. So the thing that so in the PDF that I shared, that I put online, I didn't share the prompts, but the prompts are relatively simple. So I gave the bullet points of my presentation, say, don't do this, do this, do this. And then I asked ChatGPT to give examples. And I also told ChatGPT this was a workshop for forensic anthropologists. So you saw that all the questions were appropriate for forensic anthropologists. So you can use it to generate, but always check your work and always pre-test it. I've been started to use ChatGPT more often to get going, to get unstuck. And I think it's very helpful for that.
I kind of have a follow-up question to that because I'm a big believer that you should always try to have like some beta testing or somebody else, kind of try to take it. But like, let's say it's just me, right? Like, do you have any suggestions on how can you get feedback on your survey before you deploy it if you don't have like, a grad student handy or like another faculty member handy that like does similar stuff? Do you have any thoughts?
You always have people that you can bother. And so you reach out to those people. Yeah, it's never just you. I don't think that can be an excuse, because that's when you get bad surveys. Uh, and it's having other people take your survey and pointing out what's wrong with it is the best way to improve your surveys.
I don't think you talked about it too much, uh, but like, where do you think all of the survey design stuff? I mean, I think I kind of know the answer, but where do you think all that survey design stuff comes in relation to like IRB, and like when should you start doing beta testing versus when should you start moving forward with trying to get IRB and all of that, all the kind of more bureaucratic things?
Um, so the IRB is it's because at least at Ohio State become much easier, and so a lot of the research is now exempt. The problem with surveys is that it's a structured interview, which means that you always have asked people the same questions. And the problem with the IRB and structured interviews is that you make one change, then you have to reapply, or if it's send an amendment, if it's expedited review, or you have to reapply if it's exempt. I use mostly semi-structured interviews, and then what I say, these are the 5 topics, and here are example questions, but I may ask follow-up questions. And so the change that I make, basically it's so broad that I don't have to send an amendment if I make changes. I don't have to send or submit a new application if it's exempt. So IRB is important. Because there's lots of shitty researchers out there. So the best thing probably would to test it first. Then you get your questions right, and then you get IRB approval. Again, it may take you a week or two, but you can do everything else. And so the only thing that's left then is the survey, uploading the survey.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any more questions in chat. Anybody have anything else we want to ask Dr. Moritz while we have him here, held captive? Oh, wait, hold on. There's something here. Somebody is asking about a online certificate of attendance. I don't know that we do that. I don't know that we have that capability, Jenna, but we can see. Hmm. Okay, well, I see no further questions, so I think I just want to say thank you again, Dr. Moritz. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. And one thing I enjoyed putting this together, even though it was more work than I expected. But I think it's also lots of fun. And so getting the survey right, making a survey that is well designed, that gets you lots of data, good quality data, is really fun. So it is a challenge. It requires a lot of work. You cannot do it just overnight. But if you do it right, then you get really good data. There's one more thing that I didn't mention. When you do the pilot data or pilot testing, basically you get an Excel spreadsheet with data. Figuring out whether you got the questions and answer categories right is one thing. But then when you have that spreadsheet with data, you can do preliminary analysis and you can check whether actually you're collecting the data that you want to collect and whether you can answer the questions that you want to answer. So this is a critical part in terms of the logic of research design. So play with that data, do some preliminary analysis so that you are sure that you're getting the data that you need to answer your question. Otherwise, you're wasting people's time.
Sharon just asked a question, but real quick, I'll ask you about that. When you export your data do you typically try to do it as the text? Like, let's say you have multiple choices, good, bad, great, or whatever. Do you export it as the text? Or do you export it as like values? Do you have a preference, or how do you do all that?
The text, because my future self don't know will not know what those numbers mean. So it's really, and again, this is another workshop about data management, but you always have to think about your future self, because your future self will hate your current self if you don't do good data management. And so the numbers, yeah, keep all the as much information as possible.
I love that. I've definitely screwed myself before doing that.
We all
Okay,
do.
Sharon is asking, do you have any recommendations for sharing surveys or good ways to encourage people to take them?
It depends, of course, what your sampling strategy is. So if you have a particular group of people that you target, or you want a random sample, that's the key. If it really doesn't matter, then I would share it as broadly as possible. So use listservs, use social media, use your friends, ask your friends to send it to their friends. So you really have to be mercenary in sending it out if you want anybody to take the surveys. If you have a particular group, then you have to target them. And what I often do is send personal emails. So really would help me if you take this survey, blah, blah, blah.
Sharon says thanks. Okay.
Thank
Well,
you for giving me this opportunity.
yeah, thank you. I thought it was great. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot, so it tells you where I'm at with surveys, you know.
Good.
Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.